Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And Sony just dropped their financial results, revealing some rather big numbers for PlayStation, or at least on paper. But for me personally, I'm not necessarily as high on these results as some other people are online. I do believe context is very important, and when you look deeper into this situation, I believe Sony still feels like the PlayStation 5 is not where it currently needs to be. Their wordage indicates a change because they've yet to meet their generational expectations. Now, we also got a welcome update for the Switch 2 in how you can preserve it for the incoming future. But first, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do. I truly do appreciate each and every one of you. Let's go and get right into things, though, starting off with the early Game of the Year frontrunner, Expedition 33. I mean, I truly cannot praise this game enough. The characters, the story, the creativity, the combat, the world, just absolutely everything in this game is so exceptional. It very well could go down as an all-time great for really its genre and maybe even just gaming in general. But as we speak, there is one group of gamers that's unfortunately missing out on what I would consider a must-play experience, and that's Nintendo fans. Now, to be fair, the Switch 1 really isn't up to snuff to run a game like this without some major sacrifices involved, but the Switch 2, on the other hand, that's a little bit of a different story. Well, Sandfall's CEO was asked about a Switch 2 edition, and this was his response. Well, at this point, considering the success of the game, it kind of changes everything. So clearly, it's too early to say, but we're kind of in a situation where, let's say there are a lot of opportunities showing up, way too many at once, and we're trying to figure out what we'll go for and what we won't. But yeah, it's definitely something that could be interesting. So this isn't necessarily a confirmation per se, but what it is an indication that it's something that could eventually happen later down the road. Now, this is a small studio, so I wouldn't expect it to happen immediately. This could take a while, but I mean, my question for this would be, why wouldn't it eventually come over to the Switch 2? I mean, if you think about it, turn-based games are incredibly popular on Nintendo hardware, and in fact, it's actually my preferred way to play the genre. So if they can get it running on a Switch 2 at, let's say, 30 frames per second, which I think is very possible, then that really just kind of seems like a no-brainer move to make. So hopefully this will happen, because really everybody deserves a chance to play this game, and even more so is that this studio deserves all the success that it can get, and I think that they could have some success on a Switch 2. Now, we also got a small update for the PlayStation Portal that echoes a similar sentiment that we've previously heard from Sony in the past. As a part of their financial results, they reiterated that the PlayStation Portal has been a strong and profitable peripheral for them that they will continue to focus on in the future. Again, they've mentioned similar things in the past, but I always find this to be such an interesting topic because a lot of people wrote this device off as soon as it was revealed. I remember a lot of people making fun of it online, and they claimed that it was going to, be dead on arrival. Yet here we are, and lo and behold, it does actually have a market. Now, it's likely a limited niche market. This thing's not going to sell 20+ million devices or anything like that, but there is an audience for it. I mean, for me personally, I'm a huge fan of the Portal. I'm a pretty busy person, which is why I'm unable to post videos usually earlier in the day, and I just don't have the time to be in front of my TV all that much anymore. And that's where my Portal comes in. I frequently play it before I go to bed, and in fact, I've even completed 5 games since December 31st from beginning to end by using the PlayStation Portal. Now, it is dependent on your Wi-Fi setup. I don't want to oversell it, and I also don't play like brand new games on it. I tend to play older games like Gravity Rush or Jak and Daxter, games like that on the Portal. I think they feel much better. But if you have a good 5G setup, it runs extraordinarily well, especially now that they fixed the micro starting problem. That was one of my biggest issues early on, but now I think my only real complaint for it is that it doesn't have HDR. So games don't necessarily pop as they should, but it's still, in my opinion, a worthwhile device so long as you kind of understand its shortcomings. for that matter, I'm pretty sure the Portal will further convince Sony to dive deeper into the handheld realm going forward. I'm fairly certain we will get a more dedicated handheld in the future from them, partly because of the Portal's success. So even if you don't necessarily like the Portal yourself, I completely understand that, but its success will eventually lead to an even better handheld from them that I think even more people will enjoy. Now, speaking of handhelds, Nintendo revealed a new feature for the Switch 2, and this might seem like a small thing at first, but it's actually an extremely nice feature to have. What's happening here is that they showcased its new battery saver mode, which can be turned on via the Switch 2's settings. This was revealed through the Nintendo Today app, where they even showcased it on video, and what this does is that it gives you the option to stop charging at 90%. Now, if you're unaware of why you might want to do that, some people might think that sounds strange, but this is a way to extend the life of your battery. In fact, a lot of new phones now offers this as a feature, and there's been various case studies that details why this actually works. From my understanding, degradation happens in all batteries, so that's inevitable. Your battery is eventually going to lose a lot of its life, but most stress and degradation happens in the top 20% charging range. So if you're concerned about the battery life of your Switch 2, then this might actually be an option worth turning on as soon as you secure your Switch 2. Okay, so let's go talk about PlayStation and Sony's quarterly results. I'd say for the most part, it's been a solid quarter for them, but at the same time, I still don't think the PlayStation 5 is quite where Sony needs it to be at this point in its life. Now, I'll come back to that here in just a moment. I do still think that there's a lot of positive from this report. It wasn't bad by any stretch of the means, because the PlayStation 5 sold a whopping 18.5 million units last quarter, bringing it up to 77.8 million lifetime. Their revenue is up by 9% on the year. Their operating profit rose 43%. Their network services were up by 23%. Software sales were also up by 14%, albeit hardware revenue dropped by 6%. And first-party software also declined, which was expected given it's been a lukewarm year from their internal first-party studios. So, most of these numbers are fairly good. So why exactly am I not as high on these results as some other people are? And that all comes down to the context of this generation compared to what we saw on the PlayStation 4. Despite 77.8 million PlayStation 5s now out in the wild, that's still slightly lower than what the PlayStation 4 sold at the same point last generation. And that could be an issue for Sony. That means that PlayStation consoles have somewhat stagnated generation over generation, which isn't great, considering the outrageous rising cost of game development. A AAA game last generation may have cost, let's say, $100 million to make. But now, that number has ballooned all the way up to $300 million in some cases. So, in other words, you don't pump more money into game development unless you're expecting more money in return. Instead, what we're seeing is that the PlayStation 5 isn't really attracting more consumers than what the PlayStation 4 did. In fact, a lot of their money still comes from their PlayStation 4 user base. And the results of that is that Sony has to find new ways to make more money from their PlayStation 5 only games, either outside of the PlayStation ecosystem with games like, let's say, Helldivers 2, or they have to find new ways to make more money from the same customers. Now, that can be done through a number of different ways, such as live service, or it can be done by selling more subscriptions, or even by raising the prices of things like PlayStation Plus, or it can be done by expanding outside of PlayStation consoles. In fact, Sony's CFO revealed that their primary focus has shifted away from selling units. Instead, much like Xbox's strategy, their new focus is on monthly active users. In fact, if you look at their financial results, their numbers somewhat reflects that shift. Similar to Xbox, their hardware is down, but their software and subscriptions are up. Now, I've seen some people take this statement as meaning day-and-date PC games, but in all honesty, I'm not really expecting that anytime soon for at least their AAA single-player titles. Now, I do believe that their live service will fall into that day-and-date category more often than we've seen in the past. Helldivers 2 just had far too much success for them not to do that. They also have Bungie, who is completely multi-platform. But as for their single-player, instead, what I kind of expect is for them to increase their PC flow. Their staggered PC releases could have smaller release windows between their console counterpart. So I wouldn't be all that surprised if that strategy continues to accelerate onward, and I could even see Sony eventually releasing their own PC store at some point. I do think that PC is vital for their future, but they're not going to do it in the same way that Xbox does with their day-and-date releases. Also, a lot of people don't think about cloud gaming when talking about PlayStation, but I think that could also be a bigger focal point for them in the future. Last year, they dropped their cloud streaming update for the Portal, and it's been fairly well received. I mean, you have to remember that Sony invested into cloud gaming way back in 2012 with the Gaukai acquisition. So they've had plans for cloud gaming for a long, long time, and between that and PC, they do have ways of expanding or increasing their monthly active users, and I think that could be what they're alluding to. Over the next 5 years, they could potentially expand beyond PlayStation, even more so than what we've already seen this generation. Again, I don't think they're necessarily going to go in the same direction as Xbox with their multi-platform approach. Sony is still in a better position given their console dominance. 77.8 million consoles, that's a lot of consoles, but monthly active users is increasingly becoming more important for Sony, and with that, they do need to find new ways to reach more customers. So, cloud and PC seems to be the most likely ways for them to do that. Let me know what you all think about all of this in the comments below, though. How do you see them increasing their monthly active users? Anyways, though, that's going to be for this episode, but until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.